Hello and welcome to How Do I BI, a mini-part screencast series on SQL Server Analysis Services 2008, which is based on my book, Smart Business Intelligence Solutions with Microsoft SQL Server 2008. I'm Lynn Langett, Developer Evangelist with Microsoft in Southern California. And in this edition, I'm going to talk about processing SSAS objects, in particular, data mining structures and models. Before I go to the screencast, I'll cover the frequently asked questions and gotchas around this topic. The frequently asked questions include the fact that processing from the BIDS interface is manual. In other words, you have to click on several options in order to process. Although this is what's commonly done during development, when you move to production, of course, you're not going to implement regular processing this way. In a subsequent screencast, I'll cover integration with SSIS, which is a common method of automating the mining model processing over time. You can also process using XMLA scripts from SSMS. There are some gotchas around mining structure and model processing. You want to select the appropriate process type. Again, during development, you'll often just reprocess the entire structure as you're making changes to it and testing and tuning. During production and deployment, it's less common to do that because that'll of course make the mining models and structures unavailable to the end users, and it's more common to do incremental type of processes, and we'll be talking about that in the screencast. If you have any structural errors that are indicated by red squiggly lines and that show up in the errors window in BIDS, you must fix those errors before a process can occur. As I mentioned, mining models and structures may become unavailable to end users depending on the process type that you're implementing. If you're challenged with excessive processing time, then that's indicative of greater problems. These problems can include excessive data included in the mining structure, ineffective algorithm, incorrect content data types, and other errors in structure and data. For fixes to these errors, you're going to want to look at books online or see more information in my book about this. And now let's go to the screencast. In this screencast, we're going to examine the methods available for processing data mining structures and models. To get started, I've connected to the AdventureWorks sample inside of BIDS, and I've opened the sample mining structure targeted mailing. Now I'll remind you before we get started with this that we are working with a sample that has already been processed once. And we are also working in live or interactive mode. And the way that this is indicated is up at the top in the title bar. You can see not only the name of the project, AdventureWorks DW, but also the name of the instance to which we're connected. If we were to work in a disconnected fashion, then the processing would include a deploy step. But because we are in a connected fashion, we will simply process. Now for mining structures, we have a couple of choices in terms of how and where we execute a process in BIDS. As I mentioned in the introduction, this methodology of processing is normally only used during development because it requires manual clicking. When you move to a production situation, these process methods are normally implemented either via XMLA script, in SSMS via jobs, or in SSIS via tasks. And we will look in a subsequent screencast at how these tasks are implemented, particularly in SSIS. Before we do that though, let's understand what we can process and how processing works. If I right-click in the Solution Explorer on the targeted mailing mining structure, I have the process option on the context-sensitive menu. I'll then click that to open the dialog box associated with it, and once that comes up, then we'll see the options for processing. And you can see if you select structure, then all the mining models contained in that structure, which I'll remind you there are 4, will be processed via the processing option method that is selected in this dialog box. By default, we have process full, which means that all the structure and the data will be regenerated on the process. Process default executes either an incremental process if new data is available, or a full process if there's a structural change. Process structure, process just the structure and not the data. Process clear structure will process just the structure, and unprocess will unprocess any changes. So in addition to this, you can see that we have batch settings, a summary displayed here. By default, we're going to process parallel. We're going to use the default transaction mode. Dimension errors are set to default. Dimension key error log path is default. And process affected objects are set to do not process. If we wanted to change any of these settings, we'd click on the Change Settings button on the Process Structure dialog box, and that would open up two option tabs inside. The first is processing options, which allows us to control the parallel behavior, where we can configure the maximum parallel tasks. By default, the server decides. However, we can configure this more granularly by clicking on the drop-down menu, which has from 1 to 128 parallel selection. We could process sequential. Transaction mode is by default set to one transaction. We have the option to set that to separate transactions if that's our business need. In terms of write back, if we're utilizing write back capability, write back table is set to use existing. By default, we can change that to create or create always. Processing affected objects is unchecked by default. If we click on the dimension key errors, if we wanted to more granularly control dimension key errors, we would use a custom error configuration. So I'm going to go back over to the processing options, click OK, and then click Run. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to just process an individual model because processing the entire structure will probably take a little bit more time than we want to take in the screencast. So to process an individual model, I've opened up the targeted mailing structure to the Mining Models tab, and I will select one of the mining models. I'll select decision trees here, and I'll right-click on it, and then I'll click on Process Model, and we'll get the same dialog box that we saw with the structure. The difference now will be that the only item being processed would be the mining model, and I have the option of processing full. And then I'll click on the Run dialog box so that we can see the process progress inside of bids. Now, this is a very granular list of how this mining model is being processed via the process full command. When you are in a production situation, it is common that you will log this information for the purposes of administrative control. And you can see here that we started and we have a start time, end time, how long the duration was, so on and so forth. If we had any details associated, and I don't think we do, then we would click on View Details, and then we would see, and those would be associated DMX queries or XMLA queries. And that is how processing works inside of bids. Again, I'll remind you that you can use XMLA in SSMS or from script, and you can use SSIS, which we'll cover in a future screencast. Thank you.